The first thing I did actually was go back and redraft the vision, mission and values for us to make that our guiding light. And that has become the basis of every single decision that we take. And then we're taking people on the journey with it. And it's wonderful to see not just members, but other people around us, whether they're partners, whether they're suppliers. But there's a unity around what we're doing now.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Sarah Waddington, Chief Executive of the Public Relations and Communications Association, the world's largest professional body for public relations and communications. Representing agencies, in-house teams, and practitioners globally, the PRCA plays a central role in shaping standards, ethics, and the future direction of the profession. With a career spanning consultancy, governance, and industry leadership, she's been a consistent advocate for professionalization, social mobility, and raising standards across the sector. Sarah, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thanks so much for having me on.
That's great to have you here. Just to kind of get us going, could you give us a picture of the PRCA? What's the membership like? How many employees? What's the role it plays in the industry? What's it all about?
Yeah, so for those who are not familiar with the trade associations, PRCA is a trade association. That means we're a member body predominantly aimed at organisations rather than individuals. So you often have chartered bodies. Our equivalent here in the UK is the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. They work on individual professionalism. We're very much about corporate resilience, corporate growth, making sure that organisations achieve the highest ethical standards and continue to develop professionally. In terms of our membership, we have, say, 2/3 agency to 1/3 in-house members. It's very well balanced in terms of public relations in its wider sense and public affairs, obviously a very key part of our industry. And in terms of what we do, we operate globally. We have a significant presence in APAC and in MENA, but we do have good coverage internationally. And it's very much about, outside of making sure that everybody's aware of our code of conduct and that standards piece, it's about ensuring that governments, policymakers and business understand what it is that we do, because there is an issue I'm sure we'll come on to in terms of people's knowledge of public relations. And actually we're increasing investment in our services, but really championing the sector so it's got a representative voice, and that's fundamentally the job day to day.
So if you don't mind, let's dive right into something you sort of touched on there. PR is, I think, often misunderstood from the outside. Yeah. So what is it? Particularly when it's at its best, what is it? And how is it different from communications? How's it different from advertising? How do all the puzzle pieces fit together?
Yeah, no, this is a really, really great question. And it's one that's a big subject of debate in the industry. In fact, just before Christmas, I ended up on the BBC Radio 4's Today programme debating some of this with Sir Martin Sorrell, obviously a huge titan of the advertising world, who, he believes that public relations, which I think he equates with media relations. He told everybody who was listening that he felt that PR was dead and that actually people should flood the internet with paid content. Now, of course, I went in and rebutted that very strongly, because that's not how I see it, and it's not how the industry sees it, certainly. We believe again, want to pick on further a little bit further into the conversation, but we believe public relations is in the ascendancy. But fundamentally, it's always been adjacent to advertising and marketing. In recent years, some have kind of used public relations as a delivery function. My belief and the PRCA's belief is actually we're a separate asset class, more aligned with management. And what we provide is strategic advisory services. So where there are some kind of misunderstandings and misperception, often people think about it as media relations or lobbying or crisis management. They're probably things that people can get their head around very easily. In fact, we're much more than that. We're people who can advise at board level, and we do things like futures and foresights work, risk preparedness, as well as the crisis management. obviously really key board reporting, more important than ever, particularly in this LLM world where reputation is really shaped by what the LLMs are churning out about you. And we do the reputation custodianship, so that ongoing monitoring and reporting, but particularly making sure that your brand narrative is appropriate, consistent, and actually you're making sure that it's fact checked and picking up on any misinformation, which, as we know, just the way that the world works now, it's more important than ever. No, bad news is no longer, gone with the fish and chip paper, as we used to say. It's going to be picked up and regurgitated again if you don't deal with it. And that's really very firmly within the public relations wheelhouse.
So something I want to see if we can dig into a little bit in terms of what you said there about being a strategic advisor. I could hear that as being sort of more about risk management. And I could equally hear that as more about, I'll use the P word, the purpose word here, that like, what are we actually here for word? And how do we, then how do we express it all? But before you get around to that, what are we actually all about here? So if you can, give me a sense of how that actually plays out, in the boardroom, in the exec suite.
This is a really, really great question and gets to the heart of what I see in terms of public relations as a very ethical management discipline. There's a wonderful lady called Anne Gregory who has done a huge amount of research and work in this area. And she talks about public relations practitioners as the eyes, ears, and conscience of an organization. And certainly I do feel like that is the case where it comes to the PRCA's members. These are practitioners who, by membership of the PRCA, have committed to ongoing professional development, to driving up standards, and they adhere to a very rigorous code of conduct. And actually there's two. So if you're in public affairs, you also have to adhere to the code for professional lobbying. And it's not for the faint-hearted, but it's really important because it's a big differentiator. But it's about helping organizations make the right choices. So there's an expression that people may know about not putting lipstick on a pig. You can do all the publicity you might like or paid content you might like to tell a story about a brand, but fundamentally you will be found out if it's a mirage. What we're there to do is to talk to people about doing good business and managing your reputation that way. And so it's having that kind of the ethics at the core of the advisory role, and also making sure that organizations are really well prepped in this very, very volatile environment. So making sure that they've got the information, the data, the insights they need to make appropriate and strong leadership decisions that have their different stakeholders in mind, so that there's not just a quick fix that suits for the moment, but actually thinks more longer term. And, from that can be, you asked for an example, that can be from anything to do with employee relations. We've all got examples of organizations that have contracted and have had to make redundancy. So doing that, any restructure in the most appropriate way, not announcing it via the media, for example. It could be decisions like that, or it could be gathering stakeholder feedback that a process isn't working and actually, you've got disgruntled customers, making sure that information is cascaded back, but actually the changes are made operationally, making sure that actually you've got the right policies in place so that you've got a supply chain that's an ethical supply chain, all those kind of things like that. That's part of the role, but only just one part of the role, because we still do important things like creative strategies and execution. We do the media relations. Public affairs is one of the most strategic elements of the role. And it's really, really important to a healthy, functioning democracy. You've got to have good people doing those jobs. And I'm proud that we have them within our community.
Could you just share a little bit about yourself and how you ended up being the CEO of the PRCA?
Sure. I've had a bit of a wiggly career. And it's interesting because I never, ever thought I'd be in this role. And it wasn't on the bingo card for last year when I actually became interim and then I interviewed for the permanent role. But fundamentally, I came out of university and got my first official public relations job, and I moved around a bit. I'm in the northeast of England. It was really good because I got to understand how different organisations worked, what I liked about what I didn't, and fundamentally I then ended up managing a regional network agency. So I was overseeing 3 offices at the end for this agency, and then set up on my own. And throughout that entire first part of my career, which would have been a good 15 years or so, I was actually volunteering for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. I'd been very lucky, and I do count it as luck, that my first employer had asked me to get involved with the local committee. And it had become such a wonderful way of, achieving my own professional development, developing my network, understanding what best practice looked like, widening the network outside the region. And just it provided a number of different opportunities. And it led to being elected president of the Institute in 2018. And between that, because of what I was learning and the data reports I was seeing about the industry, I was widening what I did within my own roles, as well as being a very purpose-driven agency. I then also developed that. So we had like a management consultancy arm at the top, which then had we delivered underneath. So whether it was PR marketing execution or whether it was podcast and video, whatever that need, we were able to fulfill it. I also, with my husband, we co-founded a community interest company called Socially Mobile, because we were looking at the provision within the industry, and we could see that there was a lot of data showing that we were becoming a bit of a closed shop to anybody that wasn't white, middle class, well networked, who were able to secure opportunities that others didn't. And so we launched a not-for-profit, which is a training provider. So we offer free places to people who want to move from a tactical role to a strategic role, so they can basically earn more and create different opportunities. And fundamentally, it's about changing the leadership demographic in the PR industry. Although anybody can go on it, it's particularly aimed at those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, minority ethnic colleagues, people with disabilities, and women returners who really struggle to return in a very fast industry that doesn't really accommodate them. And so I was doing all these pieces of work. And I also started to volunteer with the Institute of Directors because I really wanted to develop my management competencies. I stepped down from the CIPR, had a bit of a break because we were focusing on Socially Mobile and our own work as professional advisors. And then I decided that the PRCA had gone through a number of different challenges, and it just gone through a governance review, and they were looking for new directors for the board. And I thought, you know what, I feel like I'm in a good place. I understand the industry. I can see the opportunity for the industry and hopefully help people navigate the challenges. Bizarrely, all of a sudden, after 20 odd years, got all of this membership body organisation experience. And they're very unusual beasts. They have different setups. They have huge numbers of stakeholders. They're not the same kind of culture as you would find in different organisations necessarily, in either private, public or third. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to put that to good use. And then here I am. So it'll be 2.5 years on, but 15 months ago I was asked to step in to the CEO role as an interim basis. I was loving it so much, and because I really had a very clear vision about where I'd like the organisation to go in support of the industry, I decided to interview for the permanent role and secured that in July last year. So yes, it's been a busy old time, but we've got a big mission. I feel like we're very mission driven, we're very purpose driven, and I love that about the organization.
So when you came in as a new CEO, you had this sense of where it needed to go. Was that a big part of why they hired you? They bought the vision, that was it, off we go? Or was it like, well, they bought the experience, and then once you landed, you sort of had to sell everybody on the vision?
No, I think that, to be fair, it was a bit of both, but also that we have a really great management board and general volunteer structure around us. And as a member organisation, we listen very, very carefully to members and also to the wider sector. And the PRCA itself had a very turbulent time. We'd had the very sad and unfortunate and untimely death of its Director General after a period of illness. And then we had a governance review, and there was kind of like a gap in leadership and vision. I think from my experience in the management board and people around me, they knew that because of previous work that I'd done, I'd built a community called Future Proof, which was all about how do we future proof the industry. Because of the membership body experience, that they knew that I had a handle on what the organisation might need, but I've always been very, very vocal about where we should be going and what the big ambition should be for the whole sector in terms of moving from, particularly in this AI-driven world, moving away from things that are very commoditizable to that strategic advisory piece and what that transition could look like. And I think there are many, many, many fantastic people associated with the PRCA. And the first thing I did actually was go back and redraft the vision, mission and values for us to make that our guiding light. And that has become the basis of every single decision that we take. And then we're taking people on the journey with it. And it's wonderful to see not just members, but other people around us, whether they're partners, whether they're suppliers, whether they're people who, they don't quite fit our membership criteria, but there's a unity around what we're doing now. It just shows the power of the vision, mission, and values. I know some people kind of think that they're like as a nice to have on a piece of paper. Mentally, I've got them, like very close to me, and I come back to it all the time. And it certainly formed the driver behind our 2026 plan.
And so what's the strategy today? What's the mission, vision, values? What are you trying to get done?
Yeah, so we've got about 2 really very clear aims. One of them is to make sure that people understand public relations. So it's increasing awareness of it and investment into our services. That's really, really important. And I can talk to what we're doing within that. And the second one is to make us a very inclusive sector, and so that everything we do is about inclusivity. And it's one of our values is inclusive by default. But to that end, to give you some examples of what we've been doing, because of the debate that I'd ended up in on Radio 4, I looked at the different definitions of public relations, and there's some really good ones out there. The CIPR has a good one, but they kind of speak to the sector, so it's helpful that if you know what we're talking about. I wanted to see if we could land on something that would talk about the economic and societal impact that we bring, but also speak to commercial outcomes. And so at the beginning of the year, we went out and did a member consultation, and I was delighted that, after a period of very hard work over a number of weeks, as you can imagine, when you're bringing in lots and lots of different voices, we were able to unite on something. And the beauty of that is that it talks about our role in terms of creating long-term value through long-term relationships and building trust, which is something that public relations does, but other disciplines don't. So yes, you can spend an awful lot of money on advertising and marketing. And there's always a role for those disciplines. But fundamentally, yes, you can shift units doing that. But actually, if you want lifetime value from a customer, I'd argue that that's down to the public relations role to have helped the brand segment their audiences and engage with them in a meaningful way. And if a mistake was made, to correct that in an appropriate way, in an ethical manner, because actually that's how you start to build trust and goodwill. And actually they'll forgive you things if you go up and say, hands up, we caught that up. And that's very much a public relations role. And, there's so much data that says that, consumers and young people particularly want that kind of ethical behavior. They want to see it. They want to understand brand values before they make purchase decisions. And so that was been really good in terms of having a definition that people can unite behind. And that's getting really good cut through. So it's getting pick up from the industry, but also when you speak to people in business. So for example, we're members of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. We've had really good feedback from them in terms of how that works and how that's cutting through, for the people that they work with. So that's been really good. And then the second thing that we've done to kind of shore that up is to commission a piece of work by CBI Economics, which is the independent arm of the CBI, to help us capture for the first time a figure which demonstrates the actual economic and societal contribution that we make to UK PR. Now, that's really, really important, because if we're going to engage with government and policymakers and say, look, you should be using us more, I think that will help build a very credible argument. And we want to be able to have our own figure to say, look, this is what we're contributing and this is how we can help. So the new definitions are part of that. This figure will be a key part of it. And I'm kind of really excited for where that will take us. We're talking about purpose. You look around at the moment, we're living in a very damaged world, a very fractured society. And there's a lot of very frightened people out there, but also a lot of angry people who are trying to capitalize. And there's a lot of right-wing rhetoric and anti-immigration speech. And for me personally, and many people, and certainly the PRCA, we believe there's an opportunity as strategic communicators to demonstrate our worth by helping broker understanding between disparate groups. And again, that's what we do every day. We work in communities to, understand people's needs, to make sure that they're met in one way or another. And so for me, as I said, there's a huge opportunity for public relations right now. We do really good work and important work. And if we can, like I say, do that one thing of increasing understanding of our work and how we help, that will naturally lead to greater investment in our services.
Yeah.
And a time where it's really desperately needed.
Boy, there's so much in what you said there that I'm tempted to dive into it. But if you don't mind, I kind of want to look at the other bit, which was the inclusivity. And just get a sense of that. All sounds right, inclusive by default, which all sounds right. But many things like that, I think, run into problems when you kind of go, yes, but what do we actually,
what does it mean in practice?
Yeah, what does it actually mean? So I just wonder if you could shine a bit of a light on that.
Yeah, so I mentioned that my husband and I co-founded a community interest company called Socially Mobile. And
Hmm.
he had a meeting with a number of other fantastic diversity groups in the public relations sector, probably about this time last year. We have a number of them, and I'm not going to go through them all. There's bound to be some I forget, but we have People Like Us, we have a Black Communications Network, we have the Asian Communications Network, Socially Mobile, our own one. I mean, there are a number of great people. I could go on and go forth. There's
Sure.
like women in PR, all sorts. And they've all been set up because there are structural issues within the industry that need to be dealt with. So this meeting took place and it was about, look, we're all doing great things in our own space, but it's not really moving the needle at all. So how do we deal with that? And I realized towards the end of last year, as I was looking at the planning, that being CEO of the PRCA allowed me an opportunity to do that. And so inclusive by default is a value, so that it's how we do business firstly, in terms of, how we treat everybody around us. But actually it's about a much bigger objective, and that's about making our sector an exemplar. And to that end, before too long, we'll be announcing an initiative called Sector of Solidarity. And it's basically to embrace all the excellent work that's been going on and centralizing that. So we have a space that people can go and understand exactly what support is there for them, whether you have a disability, whether you're from the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're working class and require greater support. What we want to do is actually house all that and centralize it, make sure that people are signposted to the appropriate support, but also audit all that to work out where the gaps are and to really look at what the structural changes that are needed so we can start to really make those. Because we talk a good game, we've talked about it for years, but the data is not showing much progress. And so fundamentally, this is about actually what are the structural changes that are needed and how do we as a collective achieve that, take the sector along with us. And then secondly, have a united voice externally. So we can say, this is how we're doing it, you should follow suit. And actually, these are how to have the difficult conversations around inclusivity, which is really difficult to do right now. It's very politicized. I certainly know a lot of our members who are quite fearful at times. And, I've got I've got a very diverse team, and we've had to, at certain times, depending on what's been happening close to where they live, if they were due to go out, say, perhaps we don't think about that today, but let's either find another route or let's work from home, whatever that might be, because we've had anti-immigration riots, we've had marches, all sorts going on, and you've got to be really thoughtful about that. So part of the job is to make sure that there's the training out there so people feel comfortable either challenging if they've got a platform and are comfortable to do that, but also to make sure that employers are providing the support that's required to make sure everybody feels safe and secure and respected. So it's a big initiative. It's not something we're going to be able to do overnight, but it's a bold ambition, and I think it's one we can achieve. And I have some fantastic people behind that, and we're doing that. It's not just a PRCA thing. We're leading on it, but all those fantastic leaders will be in that I mentioned, all the different groups. And also we're bringing the CIPR in as well, because it's an industry issue. And I really want us to tackle this and make a difference now.
Sarah, one of the things I really appreciate, think makes sense in what you're saying is that recognition you just talked about, which is we can't do this by ourselves. This is a big problem. It's got lots of strands. It's connected to lots of other things. And we've kind of got to pull people together to come at it. I think that's
stop
really
trying
important.
to repeat things. What happens is there's a lot of investment going into all our different initiatives. I think by coming together as a collective, that's really important. But also, like I say, we can audit the gaps and start to fill those. Yeah. And nor should anybody try and do that themselves. I think it's far too big. It's too sticky. It's too sticky a problem. I think it would be very arrogant of us to think that we can do that. So community effort. That's where you make the biggest progress quickest.
You started a few minutes ago to talk about the early stages of developing the strategy, going out, listening to people. Or that. How did it go from there? Who got involved? What was the process like? And if there was a time where you felt like now it's really coming together, if we were videoing that, who was in the room? What was going on?
This is the public relations and public affairs sector. People are not frightened to have a voice. So I would have had to hear whether I liked it or not. But the key is whether you listen and then you action, isn't it? So when I first got into role, there was a lot of frustration, and I completely understand it. The PRCA had a very turbulent time. I had a team that were quite vulnerable, having lived through that. And being frank, we'd experienced a lot of member churn. So, it was as an organisation that was feeling pretty fragile in every single which way. And members and past members do actually care about it. They value the role of trade association. They know how important it is to the sector to have a mission-led organisation being the voice for them. I think it was actually around the time of the vision, mission and values when we posted that. So we did that pretty quickly. But once people saw that and they realised that they'd been heard, that was the first moment where I noticed people go, okay, and they start to take notice, and they're kind of like the stronger kind of comments eased off a little bit. And then since we've been very single-minded in the mission, and I repeat it everywhere we go, we're going to increase understanding of public relations in its widest sense. We're going to increase investment in our services, and we're going to help you transition to the higher fee earning work to future-proof this industry. That has landed exceptionally well. And, you know, from a professional communicator point of view, as a person, it can feel very funny repeating the same message time and time again, because you think people are going to get bored with it, but they don't, and because not everybody hears it all the time. And, you know, there are rules about how many times you can say the same thing. You know, the speech thing in terms of say it again and tell them what you've told them. You know, it's that kind of thing. But it's really, really important. And then it's about making sure that you evidence what you're doing. So, as I said, we've got the new definition with commission research. We are busy at the moment on a big campaign for International Procurement Day, and that's really very important. So there's two things going on for the industry at the moment. Because of the very challenging economic environment, there is a bit of bad behaviour that's creeping in terms of how people are procuring. Kind of understand it, but we don't tolerate it, and we won't tolerate it. And so what we've done is we've created a very definitive guide to public relations and public affairs procurements that we're taking to procurement organisations and other business membership organisations to say, look, if you're going to procure people, this is the best way to do it. You shouldn't bring too many people into the pitch. You shouldn't drag it out over 3 months. You shouldn't then ghost them after they've spent however many thousands of pounds, you know, pitching to you. I mean, like I said, there's some bad behaviours. So that's the one thing about it. But the second bit is, again, just illustrating our important role in good governance and reputation management. Talking back to AIs, you don't get fish and chip paper anymore where people can just forget about it and say, look, don't worry about it, it'll be gone. Now, if you're not monitoring and fact-checking and picking up any misrepresentation about your organisation, it could be picked up again and then just continually regurgitated. So part of this procurement campaign is saying to people, you know, if you're doing advertising and marketing briefs, but actually what you're worried about is reputation, think about employing a strategic public relations person who can help with AI reputation audits, with the ongoing monitoring and reporting on your brand, who actually is in charge of your brand narrative and can correct misinformation. So you've got that risk preparedness and misinformation readiness on tap. And so, you know, so again, every single time we do something like that, there's a turning point. Me going on the radio to fight PR's case was a turning point, and people are like, okay, they're serious players across there. That's the role of the trade association that we want. We're glad to have someone championing. So it's about living what you're saying and evidencing that at every opportunity.
So in a number of things you've said, I've seen a connection between PR and a category of problems that I'm particularly interested in. A technical term for them sometimes is wicked problems. They're these things like homelessness, poverty, mental health. There's a whole bunch of things you can look at. And it does seem to me that part of what I hear and what you're saying is that PR professionals can play a role in that, of helping bring disparate bodies together and to find ways to communicate with each other, to talk in ways that don't exist. And then you can't solve those problems, but you can nudge them in a better direction and find collaborative ways across very disparate organizations. So am I mad, or is there some possibility
You've
that
hit
could
the nail
happen?
on the head. So interestingly, after I get back to the thorough debate in terms of PR being dead, and I was like, absolutely, we're not, and I'll tell you for why. We actually launched a storytelling on conference called Don't Flood the Internet for exactly this reason. We wanted to say, yes, you know, if you want to focus on paid content, do so, but actually we believe that your investment is better served elsewhere. And the reason I bring it up is because we did a call out, because we said, right, show us a case study, show why. Let's evidence this. So it's all right for me to say, choose PR, don't choose, you know, paid content, and certainly don't be flooding anything with it. it, but let's evidence it. And we did a call out and we selected 13 wonderful campaigns to be part of the day where people came up and they did the pitch. There was no presentation. They just came and talked to the audience about the piece of work that they'd done. Just talk about the work that you've done and the difference that it made. And the kind of campaigns that people talked about, very representative, all parts of the UK, public, private, third sector, we've been very thoughtful about it. But there were ones where, from things like PR practitioners who'd been helping organisations trying to change relationships and understanding and perceptions of immigrants now in the UK, for anybody who's read the news or lives here will know how absolutely horrific it's been for asylum seekers and immigrants, and the media doesn't help with that. So examples of campaigns like that, through to campaigns for how a hospital in London had used public relations to design a campaign that would help children who are sick, very, very, very ill at Christmas, not to feel isolated and to still help them focus on their dreams and know that there was, for some of them, that would still be a pathway forward. And even for those who wouldn't, to be able to enjoy the hobbies that they couldn't enjoy at that moment. So, really powerful stories like that, through to, very commercial ones in terms of like driving footfall and revenue. And that's how we solve those issues in terms of actually understanding communities, brokering, like I say, that understanding that might not be there, and reminding people that we're all human and we don't have to agree, but we should be respectful. And I just think we need to challenge some of the headlines and some of the rhetoric that we're hearing right now. I genuinely believe that public relations is the discipline to do that. And I would love to see certainly our UK government to employ us more in doing that. If you look across the challenges across the country, I'm based in the Northeast, and we have some of the worst health inequalities. And as you said, those wicked problems as well, they're not in isolation, they're all interlinked. We have a neighbourhood with the worst child poverty. That's linked to how long people live, whether they get education, their earning prospects. And, what's lovely around here, as I've always been incredibly impressed. I have friends and colleagues within our local NHS, and they have led the charge in terms of bringing together public services to say none of us can do this in isolation.
There's a few words that for me stand out through our whole conversation, and I just want to call them out, more not for your benefit because you live them, but maybe more for people who are listening. One is trust. I think you've talked about the role that PR plays in building trust. And another one, it sort of goes with it, is respect.
We all know trust is at an all-time low. I mean, there's a number of different data points that point to that. The Edelman Trust Barometer is a really good one that lots of people will have heard of and will know. And that, I went to the launch of that one this year, and it's one of the ones which has stayed with me the most. It was actually quite scary. It talked about how trust is so poor now that there's been a retreat, that people are retreating into their immediate communities, and only then people who share the same values. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. And this is why having trusted sources are really important to go to. Again, it's a big struggle that the media are having at the moment. With AI, there's a lot of fakery out there. And so you can understand why people just don't know where to trust. It wasn't that many years ago where one of our politicians said people are tired of experts. We're not tired of experts. That's what we want. The democratization of the media means that Mrs. Cannybody down the road can have a view. It doesn't mean it's equal to someone who's worked in academia on the same subject for years and years. And so, our role is very much about credibility and making sure that credibility and authenticity is there for everybody we work with and for ourselves, and making sure that everything is absolutely fact-checked. And like I say, that correction when it's not, but also to make sure that, back to what I was saying earlier, to do the full circle, that if an organisation or an individual has perhaps lost its way a little bit, as can happen, that we bring them back on track in the best way we possibly can.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up here in a minute, but I do have a sort of final question for you, which is just, is there something you wish more CEOs understood about communication or reputation?
I think the one thing is that how integral it is to organisational success. It's as fundamental as that. Everything an organisation needs, it requires strategic communications behind it. Like I say, whether it's employee relations, doing stakeholder engagement, it could be the public affairs piece, it could be just about having the right data and the right ethical voice at the board table. I'm not saying that other advisors can't do that role. Often you'll see the legal person, the legal rep doing that. But I'd argue that they have a very different approach to the public relations person at loggerheads in terms of the legal representation and the PR representation. But there's often, again, you get to a better place when that debate's there. But the public relations voice has to be in the room. So yeah, it's about we're integral to organizational success. Make sure you're employing it, but also make sure you're employing someone who can help de-risk the organization. So a practitioner is committed to professional development, who holds a code of conduct like our members.
Yeah.
So, choose wisely and make sure that you're choosing someone with the appropriate skill set and is not just going to please don't just expect them to do the media relations and or the crisis management when the dart does actually hit the fan.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say in terms of just think about it, look at our new definition and consider it in those terms rather than anything that you may already have thought it was.
I kind of hear you sort of a plea to ask people to update themselves a little bit.
I was trying to do it diplomatically, but exactly that.
Sarah, it's been such a great opportunity to have a chance to hear what you're up to and what PRCA is up to. Appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. And I'll look forward, hopefully, to having you back at some point to hear how it's all gone over the next few years.
Would love to. And thank you very much for asking me to come and chat to you today.
Fantastic. It's been really great. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.